Arrogant white officer disrespects black judge. His shocking verdict leaves everyone speechless. It was a courtroom filled with tension, but no one expected what would unfold that day. An arrogant white officer, confident in his position, disrespected the black judge in front of everyone. The officer made dismissive comments about the judge's authority, clearly underestimating him because of his race. The room fell silent as the judge, calm and composed, raised an eyebrow. Most expected the judge to overlook the offense or let the officer off lightly, as many had done before in similar situations. But they were wrong. The judge, with decades of experience, knew exactly how to handle the situation. Instead of reacting with anger, he delivered a shocking verdict that not only humbled the officer, but also set a powerful example of accountability and justice. The decision sent ripples through the courtroom, leaving everyone speechless and reminding them of the power of dignity and respect, no matter the circumstances. If you were inspired by Judge Williams' powerful story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Extra Story Life for more incredible stories of strength, justice, and courage. Your support helps us bring these impactful moments to life. Comment below and let us know what you think. Did this story resonate with you? We love hearing from you. Keep the conversation going and share your thoughts with us. Judge Thomas Williams had spent years building a reputation for fairness and integrity, a reputation that was not easily earned in a city that had long struggled with racial tensions and prejudice. As one of the first black judges to hold such a prominent position in the city, he carried the weight of history and the expectations of his community on his shoulders. His every decision in the courtroom was scrutinized, but he understood the importance of his role, not just as a judge, but as a symbol of hope and change for those who had been silenced for so long. For Williams, the law wasn't just a system of rules to be enforced. It was a tool for justice, a means to right the wrongs, and to ensure that everyone, regardless of their race or status, had access to fairness. Despite his powerful position, however, he had never allowed the title of judge to define him. Instead, he lived by the principle that it was about doing what was right, no matter the obstacles or the personal cost. On this particular day, the court was filled with tension as the trial of Officer James Grant, a local police officer accused of using excessive force during an arrest, reached its most critical phase. The case had already attracted a great deal of media attention, and the public was divided, with some defending Officer Grant as a hero and others demanding justice for the victim of his actions. Grant had a history of allegations against him, but his supporters, many of whom were members of the local police force, insisted that he was simply doing his job. They painted him as a man who had been wrongly accused, a protector of the community, and a dedicated officer who had been misunderstood. But Judge Williams, ever calm and impartial, knew that his role was not to listen to public opinion, but to the evidence presented in his courtroom. He sat at the bench, his expression calm but firm, and as the trial continued, he focused on the facts, the testimony, and the law. He had heard it all before: the accusations of bias, the challenges to his authority, and the whispers from those who questioned his qualifications to serve as a judge. He had faced such scrutiny for years, and while it never became easier, he had learned to tune out the noise and focus solely on delivering justice. However, nothing had prepared him for the blatant disrespect he would face from the very person who was supposed to uphold the law, the officer himself. Throughout the trial, Officer Grant had been dismissive and arrogant, his posture betraying a lack of respect for the proceedings. When it came time for him to take the stand and defend his actions, his arrogance only grew. He acted as if the courtroom was just another place for him to assert his power, as though his uniform and his position within the police force entitled him to more than just a fair trial. His attitude was evident in the way he spoke, the way he interrupted the witnesses, and the way he sneered when the victim's family gave testimony. He had no respect for the process, no regard for the weight of the accusations against him, and no understanding of the duty he owed to the public as a representative of the law. His tone was condescending, dismissive of the very people who sought justice for the victim of his actions. And it was in this environment that Judge Williams found himself tested in a way he hadn't anticipated. Despite the clear evidence against Officer Grant, despite the witnesses and the testimony that painted him in an unflattering light, the officer continued to act as though he were untouchable. The tension in the room built steadily as it became clear that Grant believed his position in society, his badge, and his support from powerful allies would shield him from any consequences. He thought that no matter what happened in the courtroom, he would walk away unscathed. What he didn't realize, however, was that the person sitting at the bench, the person he had underestimated, was a man who had faced far worse adversity in his life and had the strength to stand up for what was right. This was not just a case about the law. This was about respect. It was about the rule of law and ensuring that no one, no matter their rank, race, or power, was above it. Judge Williams knew that this trial was bigger than one officer's actions. It was about making a statement that the justice system would not be manipulated or silenced, no matter how powerful or untouchable someone thought they were. But even as he sat there, calm and composed, he could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on him. It wasn't just about the verdict, it was about setting a precedent. And he knew that whatever decision he made would resonate far beyond the walls of the courtroom. As the trial progressed, Officer Grant's arrogance only grew more evident. His swagger became increasingly apparent, his body language defensive and dismissive, as though he believed he could do no wrong. From the start, it was clear that he didn't respect Judge Williams or the court. He seemed to consider himself above reproach, rolling his eyes at every objection, interrupting witnesses as they testified, and smirking whenever the evidence didn't align with his version of events. His behavior was not only unprofessional, but also deeply disrespectful, not just to Judge Williams, but to the entire judicial process. This was a man who believed that his badge and position entitled him to behave however he wished, without consequence. Judge Williams, however, had been in the courtroom long enough to recognize the signs of someone abusing their power. He had seen it all before, people in positions of authority who believed that their status could shield them from scrutiny, people who thought that the rules didn't apply to them. And yet, no matter how many times Judge Williams encountered such attitudes, it still made his blood boil. He had worked tirelessly to break barriers and earn his seat on the bench, and to see someone like Grant, who had sworn an oath to uphold the law, act with such contempt was infuriating. Still, Judge Williams remained composed, doing his best to maintain order and decorum in the courtroom. He calmly reminded Officer Grant of the expectations for behavior in his courtroom, urging him to respect the process and the witnesses who were there to provide their testimonies. But each time he spoke, Grant only became more defiant. He muttered under his breath, making sarcastic comments about the proceedings and smirking as if to say, "This is all a joke." It was a clear sign that Grant didn't believe in the sanctity of the court or the law. Instead, he saw himself as untouchable, beyond the reach of anyone who might challenge him. The growing tension in the room was palpable. The other officers, who had come to support Grant sitting behind him in the courtroom, exchanged uneasy glances, clearly uncomfortable with his behavior. They, too, could see that the situation was getting out of hand, but no one spoke up. Grant's supporters, who had been vocal in their defense of him outside the courtroom, seemed to shrink under the weight of his arrogance. Still, they said nothing. They didn't dare challenge Grant, despite the fact that his conduct was undermining everything they stood for. What Grant failed to realize, however, was that his actions weren't just disrespecting Judge Williams, they were also disrespecting the very institution of law and justice that he swore to serve. It was a blatant display of privilege and power, a deliberate attempt to manipulate the proceedings in his favor. He had no respect for the court or its purpose, and it was becoming increasingly clear that he was more interested in asserting dominance than seeking justice. As the trial continued, the situation only became more tense. Grant's defiance was a challenge to the very foundations of the judicial system, and Judge Williams knew that if this behavior went unchecked, it would send the wrong message, not just to Grant, but to everyone in the courtroom and beyond. This was not just about one officer's arrogance. This was about ensuring that no one, regardless of their status, could undermine the rule of law without consequences. Judge Williams had heard enough. The patience he had so carefully cultivated over his career was starting to wear thin, and he knew that something had to be done to put an end to Grant's behavior before it got even worse. This was no longer just a trial about excessive force. It was a battle for respect, dignity, and the integrity of the justice system itself. And while Grant may have thought he could intimidate and manipulate his way out of responsibility, Judge Williams was determined to show him that the law could not be bent or ignored, no matter how powerful you thought you were. The worst was yet to come, but Judge Williams knew that the time for letting Grant's behavior slide was over. The breaking point came during the closing statements. Officer Grant, already on edge from the pressure of the trial, became increasingly combative. On the stand, his defense grew more aggressive as he tried to shift the focus away from his actions and onto the credibility of Judge Williams. "How can we trust a judge like him?" Grant sneered, his voice dripping with disdain as he pointed toward the judge. "What does he really know about the challenges we face on the streets? Maybe he should take a good look at his own biases before accusing us of misconduct." His words hung in the air like a poison, designed not just to defend himself, but to undermine the very legitimacy of the court and the man presiding over it. The courtroom fell silent. People gasped, some unsure of how to respond, while others looked to Judge Williams for how he would handle this direct attack. For a moment, the judge's jaw tightened, and the weight of Grant's words settled heavily on him. It was clear that the officer wasn't just trying to defend his actions. He was trying to tear down the very foundation of justice. He was attempting to stir up racial divisions, playing on the prejudices of the room, and casting doubt on Judge Williams' ability to be impartial, all because the officer didn't like the direction the case was going. It was an underhanded attempt to manipulate the situation and regain control, but what Grant didn't realize was that Judge Williams wasn't just any judge. He had spent years fighting against the very kind of systemic bias that Grant was now trying to exploit. His calmness, his years of composure in the face of prejudice and adversity, had earned him this seat, and no officer, no matter how high his status, was going to take that away from him. With a steady hand, Judge Williams folded his arms and leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving Grant's. "Officer Grant," he began, his voice measured but laced with authority, "you will not disrespect this court. I suggest you reconsider your tone." His words were calm, but there was an underlying power in them that made it clear he was no longer tolerating Grant's behavior. This was not just about one officer's misconduct. It was about the integrity of the system. Grant, however, wasn't finished. His arrogance flared, and with a mocking smile, he shot back, "What? Are you going to arrest me next?" His smirk was infuriating, as if the entire situation was some kind of game to him, something he could laugh off. But that was the moment everything changed. The tension in the room reached a boiling point. Grant's disregard for the court, for the rule of law, and for the man sitting at the bench in front of him was too much for Judge Williams to let slide. In an instant, something inside the judge snapped. He had spent his entire career working to break down barriers, fighting against the system that perpetuated inequality and corruption, and now, here was an officer, one of the very people who was supposed to uphold justice, mocking him and challenging his authority. It wasn't just about his personal pride. It was about the respect that every judge, every officer, and every citizen deserved. Judge Williams stood up slowly, his gaze unwavering, and his voice remained steady, though there was a noticeable shift in the air. "No, Officer Grant," he replied, his voice calm yet carrying a weight that was unmistakable. "I am not going to arrest you, but you will face the consequences of your actions, and your disrespect will not go unpunished." For the first time during the trial, the room seemed to hold its breath. There was a powerful silence as Judge Williams made his decision. The officer's arrogance, his attempts to divide and undermine the court, had crossed a line that could not be ignored. In that moment, Judge Williams knew that it wasn't just the case at hand that mattered. It was the message he had to send. It was about standing up against the injustice that had been allowed to fester for so long, about proving that no one, no matter their rank or reputation, was above the law. The courtroom, which had been filled with tension and uncertainty, now felt as if a shift had occurred. Everyone in the room knew that the tide had turned. The verdict, when it came, would be more than just about Officer Grant. It would be a statement about justice, integrity, and the strength of the legal system. And for Judge Williams, it was a reminder that sometimes the hardest battles, the ones that truly matter, aren't won by silence or compromise. They are won by standing, firm and ensuring that the truth cannot be silenced, no matter the cost. Judge Williams stood up, his robe flowing behind him. The entire courtroom went still, every eye now focused on him. "Officer Grant," he said, his voice now cold and commanding, "you may believe your badge and your reputation give you the right to belittle this court. But let me remind you of something. Respect is earned, not demanded." Grant shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but he didn't speak. He knew he had crossed a line, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "Your behavior in this courtroom has been appalling, and your disrespect for the rule of law is clear. I have given you every opportunity to present yourself with dignity, and yet you have chosen to act with arrogance and contempt. You will face the consequences of your actions," Judge Williams continued, his voice unwavering. Grant opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, Judge Williams raised his hand to silence him. "Officer Grant, I hereby find you in contempt of court." The room was silent for a moment as the gravity of the situation sank in. Everyone was holding their breath, wondering what would happen next. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as Judge Williams delivered his final decision. "As for the charges against you, Officer Grant," he said, "your actions will be reviewed and appropriate legal action will be taken. But make no mistake, you will not use this court as a platform to belittle the very system that upholds justice." Grant was visibly shaken. He had underestimated the judge, thinking he could bully him into submission. But Judge Williams wasn't just any judge. He was a man who had worked tirelessly to break down barriers, and he wasn't going to let anyone, especially someone like Grant, undermine the principles of justice he stood for. The room was silent, but a sense of respect washed over the courtroom. The jury, the witnesses, the spectators, all saw the truth of the situation. Grant's arrogance had been exposed, and it was clear that the justice system was capable of holding its own, even when confronted with such blatant disrespect. As the proceedings wrapped up, the respect for Judge Williams only grew. His strong, decisive action had shown that no one was above the law, not even an officer who thought he could get away with anything. For viewers watching, the story of Judge Williams was a powerful reminder. Standing up to disrespect and injustice is not just about winning the argument. It's about standing firm in your beliefs, showing the strength of character that's needed to bring about change. And sometimes it only takes one person, one moment, to make the entire system take notice.